Hi, Lucy. Anya here.
Hi.
Hi there. Right, at last. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And very quiet. Thanks, Jim. Hi, everybody. Everybody looks like they've had a very full day at Scifest Africa. Welcome to the first of the evening lectures on the Scifest Africa 2016 program. I was actually in a doctor's waiting room when I was paging through a magazine and came across this topic of human attraction to one another and how this changes with time, or how time plays a role in terms of your attraction to somebody, and how when you start dating, and just like this factor of time that plays a really big role in relationships. And at Scifest Africa, there's this tradition that we always go for the pure sciences, and lately a lot of astronomy gets featured at Scifest Africa. So we've decided to start moving into the social sciences a little bit more, into the BA fields, into psychology, because really I'm a firm believer, as with a BA background, that there are a lot of social sciences that play a very big role, and are sciences, in fact. And that certainly is also coming through in policy documents. So we've decided to take a little bit more of a social sciences stance this year at Scifest Africa. And Lucy, the article I was reading was actually about your research and what is happening at the lab where you're working. And it looks like we are definitely going to be pixelating tonight. Right, so I'm going to introduce you to Lucy and then hand over to her. So Lucy is a PhD student in the Human Development and Family Sciences at the Attractions and Relationships Lab at the University of Texas in the USA. Her research interests include the initial attraction process. So when you see that somebody and there's all this chemistry is around and the sparks start flying, and what is human attraction? What makes us attracted to one another? What is this process of human attraction? What are these stages of human attraction? And she also looks at how we form that impression of a member of the opposite sex in that moment, that initial encounter with one another. She is also part of a group of postgraduate students, and I found this quite interesting, because there's so much dating advice out there, there's so much relationship advice, but really what is the science behind it all? And I think this is what I really found fascinating. So Lucy, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us tonight. And I'm going to hand over to you and then do what I do and scurry back, backstage and see if we can get your presentation downloaded. But in the meantime, over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That was a lovely introduction. I'm very, very excited. Graduate students don't get as many opportunities to talk about our research, and I think it's great that you are being more open to the social sciences. One of the things I hear all the time is, well, you can't really study attraction or love. That's not possible. It's all in our brains. We don't know what's happening. And even though there's a lot that we still don't know, we still can use the scientific method. We can design studies in such a way to sort of tap into these processes, both very, very specifically, as I'll talk about, and kind of more generally. So yes, I study human mating, and it pervades almost every discipline in the social sciences, from anthropology to economics to psychology. And I specifically approach this research from a social, psychological, and person perception background. Specifically, I examine differences in the way we form romantic impressions of others, how we judge how attractive, intelligent, charismatic, exciting, and overall desirable that we find other individuals whom we encounter. I look at how romantic judgments may shift depending on a variety of factors, including time. For example, how long two people have known each other, romantic involvement, whether or not two people are actually involved, or whether you're currently involved in a romantic relationship when you meet somebody new, as well as setting, the context in which we encounter people in real life. For many, many years, it was just face-to-face, but especially in recent decades, the doors open in terms of how we encounter people, be it in a photograph or online dating, a profile on the computer. And some of my recent work, I'm not really going to talk about that today, but it's looked at how the setting in which we meet somebody does make a difference. For example, we form very different kinds of impressions of the same individuals if we only encounter them in a photograph than through a video like this or interacting face to face. And this is important because we do a lot of attraction research only using photographs or only using face-to-face interactions. And if people actually form different kinds of impressions based on the setting, if the setting elicits different kinds of romantic impressions, we want to be careful and not say, okay, because I found this in my photograph study, we're also going to see it in real life, or as we call it, in the field. So in some of my published work, I examine how judgments of romantic desirability, for example, ratings of attractiveness, shift over time. And it turns out time does do some exciting things to the way we assess other people's desirable qualities, especially the qualities that we are looking for in a potential romantic partner. Before I get into the specifics of my work, though, I'd like to give you a little background on how research and mating is conducted, just a really sort of very brief overview of how it's done lots of ways. So on studies examining attraction, we often look at how individuals' first impressions of other people develop, people that they've never met before. This allows us to examine what kinds of people we are more attracted to and the kinds of people we are less attracted to. And it turns out that early on, we do have a pretty strong sense of who we like and who we don't like. There's a lot of work on what's called thin slices and how we get pretty accurate impressions fairly quickly. So in person perception research, we look at first impressions in a variety of settings. One common way is through photographs, like I mentioned. We show individuals a photograph of a target, often just his or her face, for a particular length of time. And then we ask participants who we bring into the lab to ask them about their impressions of that person, how attractive, intelligent, exciting, smart they think that person is. And much of this research is focused on identifying what factors, such as type of judgment and exposure time, predict accuracy, liking, and various other outcomes. So photograph paradigms like this are especially useful to researchers because they give us a lot of experimental control. We can easily show participants a large number of photographs, and we have control over how different the people look in those photographs and how long we even let participants see the photographs. So we can see the accuracy, let's say, in people's impressions based on only 500 milliseconds versus, several seconds at a time. So for example, if I was examining attraction, specifically inter-ethnic attraction, so when people are attracted to people from different ethnic backgrounds, I would probably use photos of individuals who come from a variety of different ethnic backgrounds rather than somebody who comes from similar ethnic backgrounds. So photograph paradigms are great in that we get control over what the participant sees, and all the participants are seeing the same thing. In addition to photographs, we also do written vignettes. Sometimes we'll have participants read a story about a hypothetical person and then ask about their impressions, or even just a list of traits. So other research paradigms target specifically live face-to-face interactions, the kinds of impressions we get from people when we meet them face-to-face. And this work utilizes things like Confederate paradigms, group settings, and speed dating paradigms to target face-to-face based impressions. This work is especially interesting because unlike photographs or written vignettes, those interacting in person have a lot more situational and nonverbal cues from which to gain information. For example, body language, tone of voice, environmental factors like how the ratio of women to men in the room, all these things can alter the attraction process in really interesting ways. So these cues and more are present in a live interaction in ways that they're not when you're just viewing a photograph. And I like to think that this work is especially important because it actually mirrors how we're usually meeting and interacting with people. Although we can encounter people online, usually the idea is that we eventually meet face-to-face and get to interact. So I mentioned a Confederate study, and I just want to explain really quickly what that is for those of you who don't know. So in a Confederate study, we bring individuals into the lab and have them interact with somebody that they think is another participant, but who's actually a member of our own lab, the Confederate. So this Confederate is often instructed to act in a certain way with each actual participant. And that way we can see what particular behaviors affect the behaviors in the people that we're actually bringing into the lab. So by having all the participants interact with the same person, we do have greater experimental control than if we just had participants coming in and interacting with each other, because in that case they'd always have a different interaction partner, and you don't know so much about what's going on is actually being pulled from a specific behavior, let's say. So for example, in one Confederate study looking at the chameleon effect, which is the tendency for us to mimic the behaviors and mannerisms of people we're interacting with, they had a Confederate talk to a participant, and the only difference, they had two different conditions. So half the participants were in one condition, the other half were in another. And one condition, the Confederate rubbed his or her nose or face, and the other one tapped their foot. And then they looked at how often the participant would then tap their foot or rub their nose, and found that you were more likely to mimic the behavior that the Confederate was actually doing than other behaviors. I'm actually running a Confederate study right now. I'm still collecting data, so I can't give you the results, unfortunately, but it actually is examining a very specific short period of time. That is the time it takes for a rise in testosterone to take place in the body when someone meets somebody, a stranger of the opposite sex. So I'm looking specifically at heterosexual individuals, so only those who are attracted to somebody of the opposite sex. And I'm bringing them into the lab, and I'm also having a measure of their testosterone, both right at the beginning of the study and then after they've interacted with this pretty attractive opposite sex individual. So essentially I have a team of 2 research assistants, a boy and a girl. If the participant's a girl, then the female research assistant acts as the experimenter, whereas if then the male RA acts as the Confederate, whereas if it's a male participant, the male RA would act as the experimenter, and the male participants would all interact with the female RA. So all the participants are interacting with the same person. All the male participants are interacting with the same girl, and all the female participants are interacting with the same guy. And previous work on testosterone has shown that in general, when meeting a new reasonably attractive person of the opposite sex, heterosexual men tend to show this spike in testosterone, this increase in testosterone. And this increase in testosterone then leads to an increased likelihood to engage what we call mate pursuit behaviors. So things like flirting, maintaining a lot of eye contact, leaning in, any sort of actually asking someone out on a date. But what we don't know is whether this spike in testosterone just happens automatically, like evolutionarily, we are motivated to seek out romantic partners so that we can reproduce and pass on our genes, or does there have to be a level of attraction first? And so by having men come in and then interact with somebody and also getting measures of their testosterone both before they interact with the woman and then after, I can see if this testosterone spike happens just automatically. Men like women, and if there's an attractive woman, he will be motivated to pursue her, or does there have to be some level of attraction? And honestly, I could see it going either way. For example, there's also work showing that men who are in committed romantic relationships experience much less of a spike in testosterone. Additionally, men who rate high on what we call unrestricted sociosexuality, so people who highly endorse things like sex without love is okay, I don't need to be in a committed relationship to have sex. People who believe things like that also experience a greater spike in testosterone. So there's individual level factors that can also contribute, and relationship level factors that can contribute to this finding. So that's just to give you an idea of a Confederate study examining face-to-face interactions. In studies using group settings, we will often bring a number of individuals to a study session at the same time and have them all interact together. So instead of having one participant sign up for one study time, say between 10:30 and 11:30, we'd instead book about 5 or so and then watch them interact together, usually videotape it so that we can later code behaviors and things like that. So although every group of individuals will demonstrate different behaviors and dynamics because it will always be a different group of people, this work is useful when we're interested in how people interact in settings when it's more than 1 or 2 people interacting. Speed dating paradigms have recently begun to be used by attraction researchers in the last decade or so, and it's an excellent way to study romantic initiation in a way that pretty closely mirrors what's going on in real life. Say, if you were at a bar and you were walking up or having different people coming up to you and talking to you. So at a typical heterosexual speed dating event, we bring in a group of 10 or 15 or 20 to 30 people, about even mix of men and women, and single individuals who are interested in meeting potential romantic partners, and we have them attend brief dates with every opposite sex person in attendance. So if I'm a female participating in this study, I would go on a date for about 3 to 8 minutes with every single other man in the room. Usually it's about 10 to 15 dates of about 3 to 8 minutes each. The whole study event itself takes place over the course of an hour or two, but we can get a lot of great ratings, what we call reciprocal ratings, when both people are rating each other and in a large group. And it's a really, really nice way to look at attraction in that moment when we're first meeting somebody, which is where all the exciting stuff tends to happen. So, like I said, over the course of an hour, people interact with somebody, each opposite sex person, and at the end of the 3 to 8 minutes, a buzzer or a bell goes off signaling that it's time to move on to the next person. But before you do that, you also usually privately indicate on a piece of paper whether what we would say you yes or no the person, meaning, would you like to see this person again, yes or no? And we actually use this as a dependent variable as the measure of romantic interest, because if you want to see them again, likely you are at least somewhat interested in them romantically. In regular speed dating events that take place outside of research, this is typically the only information you get, whether you yes or no, and then the people who organize the event later give you the emails of the people who yesed you as well. But when we do speed dating and research, we also get a number of other measures. So immediately after the date, we might not only ask people whether they want to see that person again, but we'll also get a variety of other impressions. How attractive was that person? Did you feel like you had a connection? Did you feel you were similar? How intelligent did you think they were? How ambitious? A variety of impressions. And before the event, we'll also have the participants fill out a number of things about themselves, such as how intelligent they think they are or attractive, the qualities they'd ideally want in a partner. And that way we can later look at things like, do we seek out people who are similar to us? Or do we only seek out those people who embody our ideal qualities, those qualities that we say are really, really important? Or does what we say we want not match at all who we end up yesing at the end of the day? So in sum, when researchers study attraction, they often do so by looking at people's first impressions of others, be it from a photograph or a live interaction or another setting. And we don't only look at who people are attracted to, but also what qualities people are attracted to. And there's actually a large program of research dedicated just to identifying and looking at these ideal qualities, what we call in the field mate preferences. The qualities that individuals say are important to have in a romantic partner. So a number of lines of research have focused on identifying these mate preferences. And in actually a very impressive investigation done in the late 90s, social psychologists Fletcher, Simpson, Thomas, and Giles had both female and male individuals create a list of ideal qualities that they saw in a romantic partner, as well as rate how important each quality was. They found, for example, that individuals tend to highly value qualities related to the development of an intimate and loyal relationship, such as kindness, support, warmth, and trustworthiness. People also highly rated qualities related to a person's vitality and health, indicators of general vigor, such as attractiveness and adventurousness and passion, as well as qualities related to a person's status and resources, things like financial security and ambition. In much of my own work examining attraction and mating, I ask people how much they think another person possesses these ideal qualities. For example, I might show individuals a photograph of a subject and ask them on a scale from 1 to 10 how attractive they think that subject is. Other work examining mate preferences concerns how people's ideal standards affect other kinds of romantic evaluations. For example, if another person does not possess the qualities I consider important to have in an ideal partner, do I then rate that person as less appealing? Am I actually less likely to initiate a date with that person? And in my own work, I especially focus on how these judgments of ideal traits might fluctuate over time. For example, if I rate someone as a 7 out of 10 in physical attractiveness when I first meet him, will that judgment stay the same even after getting to know him better over time? I've also looked at whether agreement on qualities changes. So if we're asking a bunch of people to rate the same people, do they show a lot of agreement? And does that change over time? Are people more likely to agree about how attractive someone is early in the acquaintance process, so shortly after you just met someone versus later? Now, some of you might be wondering, what does it matter if we change our minds? That's great, we change our minds all the time. Why would it matter if we agree or disagree about who is attractive and intelligent, etc.? Well, one answer is because of competition. According to classic evolutionary and social exchange theories of human mating, individuals compete with one another for valuable romantic partners, namely those who possess these ideal mate preferences I've just been talking about. And if we agree on who or what is desirable, that is, if we agree about the qualities that we want, and we agree on who the attractive people are, for example, then we should best achieve success by pursuing potential romantic partners we would realistically be able to obtain. In other words, a person whose desirability matches our own. Another way to think about the search for a romantic partner in this way, and it's a metaphor we use a lot in the field actually, is to think of it like a market. Except instead of trading commodities like food or money, you're instead shopping for a partner, so to speak, by sizing up another person's desirable qualities and comparing them with your own. So just as in a market where you begin to negotiate a fair price, for example, the appropriate amount of currency for a given product like food, on the so-called mating market, the idea is that two individuals should pair up if they are of similar desirability, if they possess desirable romantic qualities to the same extent. The idea here is that the highly attractive individuals should pair with the other highly attractive individuals, and those who are less attractive settle for one another after the more fortunate have paired off. Put another way, when we agree on what is desirable, when we agree on the extent to which others possess various qualities, our best bet is actually to just pursue someone of a similar level of desirability. Not the hottest person out there, but the person whose hotness matches your own. But what happens if we don't agree on who is desirable? And a lot of work has addressed this assumption. Do we even agree? If we show a greater tendency to disagree about how attractive another person is, and if we are instead more likely to make unique assessments of others' qualities, then competition for romantic partners should be reduced. Because instead of being confined to potential partners who everyone agrees is of similar desirability to yourself, you instead can pursue anyone who uniquely finds you desirable. If people disagree or make unique assessments of others' romantic qualities, then they're not confined to pursue someone of a similar level of desirability because no one's agreeing on who is similar. Let me give you an example. In the first scenario I'm going to give, I'll describe a situation of high agreement. And in the second scenario, I'll describe a situation of high uniqueness. So in scenario A, Bob, Chris, and Danny, three boys, rate Fiona on how attractive they think she is on a scale from 1 to 10. And each man, let's say, rates Fiona between a 3 and a 4. In other words, they show strong agreement about how attractive they think Fiona is. Similarly, Fiona and several other women agree in their judgments of the 4 men. So in this scenario of high agreement, Fiona is most likely to succeed by pursuing the man who is also consistently rated as a 3 to 4 in attractiveness. Agreement is high, and as a result, competition is strong, and Fiona is confined in her choice of mates. She is most likely to succeed by selecting the man who is of a similar level of attractiveness to her, a 3 to a 4. Why? Because everyone is agreeing on who is attractive and who is not. Now take scenario B, which will feature high uniqueness. In this scenario, the 3 men disagree in their judgments of Fiona's attractiveness. Bob rates Fiona as an 8, Chris rates her as a 2, and Danny rates her as a 5. In this case, Fiona would be best served to pursue the man who rated her as especially high in attractiveness. And the man who finds her uniquely attractive, Bob in this case, who gave her an 8, may himself vary in attractiveness. For example, it could be the case that, let's say most people do think he is a 3, but there could also be a lot of disagreement about his attractiveness. Some women will think he's even more attractive than the 3, thinking he's more of a 5, a 7, or even a 9. And some women will also think he's especially less attractive, so not even a 3, but a 1. But the idea here is that when uniqueness is high, competition is diminished, and people are less likely to end up with someone of a similar level of attractiveness. Why? Because people are disagreeing about who is actually attractive. So the million-dollar question is, in what situations in real life feature high agreement, and what situations in real life feature high uniqueness? Are there certain times in life when people are especially likely to agree versus disagree about who is desirable? And this is a question I've explored in some of my recent work with my graduate advisor, Paul Eastwick. Generally, we both felt that the search for a compatible romantic partner, while it can be very frustrating and difficult at times, it seemed like the story of the haves and have-nots of, only the people who are really attractive, intelligent, and charismatic have it all, whereas those who don't just have to settle, that seemed a little too grim to us. And so we thought, based on these theories of market forces and competition, we could look at an aspect of time to see if there might be more of a silver lining for those who aren't considered desirable by collectively agreed upon or conventional standards. So in the first investigation I'll be presenting today, my advisor and I examined how judgments of others' romantic desirable qualities, the mate preferences I've been discussing, shift depending on how well 2 individuals are acquainted. So in one study, we examined possible changes in romantic evaluations by having classmates at the University of Texas rate one another, both at the beginning of the semester and at the end of the semester. This way, we were able to see if their judgments of one another's qualities changed after they'd become acquainted over the course of an entire school term. The qualities consisted of 14 traits that previous research has shown are considered highly desirable qualities to have in a romantic partner. This includes some of the qualities I've mentioned: attractiveness, intelligence, ambition, financial security. The participants consisted of 129 college students here at the University of Texas at Austin who attended a large lecture class and also met in small discussion groups once a week for 1 hour. These small groups consisted of 16 to 17 students each, with a mix of both female and male students. During the second week of class, we took a photograph of each participant's face so that the students could then use the photographs to help identify their classmates when making their ratings. A few days later, students rated all of the opposite sex classmates in their small discussion groups on each of the 14 romantically desirable qualities. So, in essence, each participant ended up rating between 2 and 15 opposite sex classmates, depending on group size and competition, or composition, not competition. Well, maybe competition. So some classes, for example, had many girls relative to boys, and some classes had a more even distribution of men and women. So they made these ratings about 2 weeks into the semester, and again 14 weeks into the semester, so with a 12-week gap into making their ratings. And at both time points, at the 2-week and the 14-week, they rated their classmates on the same 14 traits. So in order to examine possible changes in romantic judgments, we used a highly complex statistical approach called the social relations model, which was developed by David Kenny. And this model essentially allows us to identify the source of people's ratings. For example, do a lot of people's impressions come from how an individual tends to rate others? So if, for example, there's a lot of actor variance, that would indicate that a lot of the impressions that we're seeing are actually being pulled from the individual. It's being driven by how raters tend to rate other people. So for example, if I hold the belief that people are inherently trustworthy, I will rate most people as very trustworthy, regardless of how trustworthy they actually are. So if there's high actor variance, that would mean that most of the impressions that we're seeing are actually being driven by the individual doing the rating rather than the people that they're evaluating. The second component that this model allows us to look at is target variance, which essentially gives us an indication of how much people are agreeing. So it's our measure of agreement. If there's high target variance, that means raters tend to agree in their assessments of the same individuals. So everyone is agreeing that Bob is a 4, and everyone is agreeing that Danny is a 7, and so on. And thirdly, we can examine uniqueness, which is assessed by relationship variance. And that assesses the extent to which people, above and beyond how they tend to rate others, and above and beyond how individuals tend to be rated by others, when people make particularly unique assessments. So even if I tend to see people as very trustworthy, and maybe most people see me as highly trustworthy, I might rate 1 or 2 people as very untrustworthy, and this would indicate a unique rating. And so if there's high relationship variance, that means there's a lot of unique sort of ratings going on. If you'd like to know more specifics on this model, I encourage you to contact me afterwards or read one of the papers, but it is definitely beyond the scope of me explaining right now, and it's the boring math stuff, so who wants to do that? So previous research examining perceptions of other people suggests that people tend to reach moderate to strong agreement in the ratings of others' desirable traits, such as attractiveness and intelligence, when forming first impressions of other people. In other words, individuals are likely to reach some agreement about others' romantic qualities when meeting someone for the first time or only seeing that very brief photograph. However, previous research has also shown that agreement does not typically get better as people become acquainted over time. In fact, as people come to know each other across different settings, judgments are likely to become increasingly unique. This makes sense because, as you probably all know, how you interact with someone in a professional setting can vary quite a lot than how you'd interact at a bar or at home. And in fact, some previous research has demonstrated that when we are rated by people who know us quite well, such as family members and friends, they tend to show very little agreement about more subjective qualities, such as how supportive we are. So given these lines of work, we hypothesized that even college classmates, not just friends and family, would also be less likely to agree in their judgments of one another's desirable qualities, to the extent that they had more time to get to know one another over the course of the semester. So consistent with these trends, we hypothesized that classmates would be more likely to agree in their judgments of one another earlier in the semester when they'd only been acquainted 2 weeks than later in the semester when they had time to interact over 14 weeks. So you won't get to see my visuals, but I can give you just the basics. So after analyzing the data, we found that the results largely supported our predictions. So over time, individuals agreed less about the extent to which their classmates possessed a number of romantically desirable qualities. And so this was reflected in the difference in target variance between week 2 and week 14. And there was greater target variance, meaning greater agreement at week 2 than at week 14. Furthermore, individuals were more likely to make unique assessments of their classmates after they had known each other for a longer time as well. So relationship variance was higher at week 14 than week 2, indicating that as people got to know one another better over time, they were more likely to make unique assessments. So after conducting this study, we were curious to see if these trends extended to certain kinds of long-term acquaintances. So specifically, do people reach even less agreement when judging individuals they freely select as their friends, and especially romantic partners? In the classroom study, individuals largely became acquainted in the same setting, their once-a-week discussion sections. Close friends and romantic partners, though, we get to know across a variety of settings and usually over a much longer period of time than, say, 14 weeks. We retain friends and partners for weeks, months, and even years. So we hypothesized that because we come to know close friends and romantic partners over the course of many months and years and across different settings, their romantic evaluations of us would be especially likely to be unique. In other words, friends and romantic partners would be especially likely to disagree with one another about the extent to which we're warm, intelligent, attractive, etc. So in this study, we had 92 college students nominate up to 10 opposite-sex individuals whom they knew personally. If the student was currently involved in a romantic relationship, we asked that they nominate their romantic partner as one of those 10 individuals. So I will refer to the 92 college students as the focal persons, and I'll refer to the opposite sex individuals that these college students nominated as the targets. This methodology is known as a one with many design. The one refers to each focal person who nominated the many individuals, the many referring to the 2 to 10 opposite sex individuals whom the focal person nominated for the study. So first, the focal persons rated each of their up to 10 nominated targets on those same 14 traits that we had in the first study. Then we emailed all of the targets and asked each of them to rate the focal person on those same qualities. In other words, although each focal person rated all of their 2 to 10 targets that he or she nominated, the targets only rated the focal person who nominated. So you can think of it as one person, rate, but then they're only rating the focal person, not each other. Because not all of our friends know each other, and we wanted to look at specifically how our friends and romantic partners see us. So let's say that Hannah was a focal person in this study, and she nominated Isaac, her boyfriend, as well as James, Kevin, and Liam, 3 of her male friends. The people they nominated could not be related to them. They had to be peers. So Hannah would rate Isaac, James, Kevin, and Liam on the 14 traits, and then each of the 4 men would rate Hannah and only Hannah on those same traits. So thus we could rate the extent to which Isaac and the 3 friends agreed versus disagreed in their assessments of Hannah's qualities. So like I mentioned, we hypothesized that such long-term acquaintances would be especially likely to form unique assessments and be less likely to agree about their focal persons. We also thought that these trends would be strongest for romantic partners. So romantic partners above and beyond everyone else would demonstrate the strongest tendency to view the focal persons uniquely. After all, as we know from established romantic relations research, we often see our partners in ways that others do not see us. And in happy relationships in particular, we tend to see our partners way better than both they see themselves and other people see them. So after analyzing the data, our results once again supported our predictions. So close friends and especially romantic partners were even more likely than classmates to disagree in their assessments of others and instead make very unique assessments of their focal persons. So taken together, these 2 studies suggest that agreement about people's romantic desirable qualities do shift with time. We are more likely to agree in our assessments when we have known someone for a shorter rather than longer period of time. This is important because it is not always the case that we begin a romantic relationship with someone immediately after first meeting them. Although this is sometimes the case, we also often begin a romantic relationship only after getting to know the person over a period of days, months, and even years. This makes sense because we do not always know what kind of relationship we want when we first meet someone. Whether we want a friendship, romance, or no relationship at all, it often just takes time. Indeed, time is a central element of many relationship formation and courtship theories. Some research concerning established romantic relationships, for example, is focused on positive illusions, the tendency for individuals to view their romantic partners as more wonderful than they actually are. And having positive illusions helps people to maintain their relationships, especially in light of threat to their relationships, such as coming across a really highly attractive alternative partner. It may be the case that positive illusions emerge in relationships in part because two individuals have taken the time to come to see each other in uniquely wonderful ways. If uniqueness indeed increases with time, the longer we get to know someone, the better idea we'll have of if that person is especially desirable or wonderful, or especially undesirable. The sad part of that coin flip is that we can see people as uniquely really, really good or also really, really bad. So after this investigation, we are curious to see how a specific element of time in the beginning of a romantic relationship might affect characteristics of the relationship years later. Specifically, given our previous findings demonstrating that judgments of romantically desirable qualities feature less agreement and more uniqueness over time, we are curious to see if how long romantic partners were acquainted prior to starting their romantic relationships might affect their similarity on a particular trait, specifically the degree of similarity on physical attractiveness between two members of a couple. So are members of a long-term relationship likely to be of a similar level of attractiveness depending on how long they knew each other before beginning those relationships? So given that agreement on romantic qualities is higher in acquaintanceships of short duration, we predicted that couples who began their romantic relationships soon after meeting for the first time would be more likely to be matched in physical attractiveness than couples who began their relationships long after first meeting. Put another way, when agreement is high, such as first impression settings, competition is high. For example, when people have only been acquainted for a short period of time, they mostly tend to agree that Michael, let's say, is a 6 out of 10 in attractiveness. And so Michael is forced to settle for the women that everyone agrees are also 6s out of 10. When on the other hand, agreement is lower, such as periods of longer acquaintanceships, competition diminishes. Over time, people are less likely to agree about Michael's and other people's attractiveness, and thus Michael can pursue individuals who vary in attractiveness, not only those who are of a similar level of attractiveness. So in a sample of 169 dating and married couples in the Midwestern United States, we examined whether the length of time that partners were acquainted prior to beginning their romantic relationships predicted how similarly attractive the partners were many, many years later. So we asked couples two questions. First, how many months have you known your partner? And second, how many months have you been romantically involved with your partner? We then took the difference between these two responses, time known minus time romantically involved, and used that value as our measure of length of acquaintance before dating. Just in case you're curious, the average length of time that couples knew each other before dating was about 3.8 months. But each couple was acquainted anywhere from less than a month to over a year before they started dating. So many different kinds of relationships, some that began right after they just met and some that didn't start until many months or even over a year later. So given that people do tend to disagree in their assessments, if we really are seeing people more uniquely as we get to know them, it wouldn't really be a good measure of attractiveness if we asked all the couple members to rate each other. So to get a less biased measure of attractiveness, we had 7 independent judges rate the attractiveness of each member of all the couples. So we videotaped the couples having an interaction, and then we had these 7 independent judges who had nothing to do with the study rate the attractiveness of all the participants. So that way we had for each couple a measure of the husband's attractiveness or the boyfriend's attractiveness and a measure of the girlfriend or the wife's attractiveness. So we predicted that people who were acquainted only a short time before dating would show greater similarity in attractiveness compared to those who were acquainted for a while. And the results supported our hypotheses. So the figure I was going to show you basically was plotting On the x-axis, how long couples had known each other, and then the y-axis was the correlation or the association between husband's attractiveness and wife's attractiveness. So correlations of, let's say, 0.5 and up would indicate a pretty strong similarity, whereas lower values, say 0.3 and below, would indicate that the husband and wife or boyfriend and girlfriend were not very similarly attractive. So essentially what we found was that partners who began dating within 1 month of first meeting showed a much stronger tendency to be similarly attractive years later. So we assessed attractiveness when we brought couples into the study a couple years ago, but many of them had begun dating years and years before. So it's really interesting that we saw this effect even though we're assessing attractiveness years later. So it wasn't just how attractive they were when they first started dating, but how similar they are years into the relationship. So as the time period of acquaintanceship increased before people became romantically involved, similarity went down. If partners knew each other for about 9 months or more before they started dating, matching on attractiveness was modest and not significantly more likely than chance. So essentially, when it's within a month, you'll see very similar kinds of attractiveness between the man and the woman. But once you get to 9 months, that's when it's no more likely than chance. So overall, these findings are consistent with our first investigation, demonstrating that longer acquaintanceships feature less agreement and more uniqueness on romantic qualities. And situations of less agreement and more uniqueness may reduce competition on the mating market and allow people to obtain uniquely desirable partners. So we've probably all, I know that I've experienced that sense of when you're walking down the street and you see a couple that just doesn't look like they should be together, and you experience sometimes even this sort of psychological discomfort. It's similar to when we come across someone and we can't tell what gender they are. We are very motivated to think that we have a beat on things, that we sort of know what's going on. And so when we encounter something that doesn't really make sense, we're likely to want to figure out what that is. And what I think this tells us is it's not that they're wrong together, it's just that maybe they didn't become romantically involved until they got to know one another over time. That these other signs of compatibility just needed time to emerge. So how does time affect dating and marriage? By influencing competition on the mating market. When the time period in which two people have been acquainted is short, competition is high because people are more likely to agree in the extent to which others possess a variety of romantically desirable qualities. I also like to call this the high school effect. Many people experience high schools are very cliquey and you can only get with certain people in your group. And this also might reflect a situation in real life that's in which competition is higher than what we see when our parents promise, oh, just get to college or just wait till you're done with school and things get better. When, on the other hand, the time period in which two people have been acquainted is long, competition is low because people are especially likely to disagree on the extent to which others are desirable. So for those of you who may be having a difficult time finding a compatible partner, you may just need more time to find out who amongst those you meet are truly compatible. It may be better not to rely so much on our initial impressions because they can change markedly over time. Time, in essence, may be necessary to find out who we uniquely find desirable. And that's all I have.
They are all clapping. You don't have to worry.
Thank you for being patient and having to stare at my face for an hour.
But, you know, we actually did have the presentation on this side. We were just trying to follow you as you went through.
Oh, okay.
So.
Good.
And I think she looks particularly lovely, don't you? Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, what a great start to my day.
What a great end to ours. Okay, so Lucy, we're going to take a few questions. Where's my roving mic man? There he is. If you have a question for Lucy, I'm going to ask that you just speak directly into the microphone so that she can hear you. So, Master Jedi, we'll start with you.
Thanks for the talk, Lucy. Just two quick questions. The one, may unattractive people study in your field? And And number two, on a bit more of a serious note, there was somewhat recently a TV show launched called Married at First Sight, where they basically used science to say that these two people would be attractive to each other, and then they would only meet at the altar, and it's a bit different from your studies where people had a say. But could your research be used to basically say scientifically that you would be happy paired with this person?
Wow, that's a really good question. So there are people who vary in attractiveness who study relationships, although I will say that there definitely is a bias for people who are, I would say, serial monogamous, people who are often in romantic relationships, definitely more of those people in the field. And that's a really interesting show. So that actually reminds me of a lot of the work on online dating. So there are companies like eHarmony that say that they have matching algorithms, right? And that they say once we get your traits and your ideals and their traits and their ideals, that they can match you with somebody. And the issue is that when they presented their research at our conferences, there are many holes in their data. So their numbers look really impressive, but there's always the little footnote, kind of like when you watch those commercials and then there's all the side effects at the end of the medication. It's that they only tested how well the matching algorithm worked on couples that actually ended up dating. And so it wasn't a really true test of their matching algorithm, because they were only selecting the sample of people who probably would have done great anyway, rather than also looking at all the people that you didn't choose, right? So I would say that when it comes to getting first impressions on a photograph or a profile or anything written down, anything that's more hypothetical, you're in this sort of more judgmental space, that you aren't as good at predicting who you will actually end up choosing in person. Versus if you interact live in person, and even for just a few minutes, like in a speed date, then you actually would get that sense. So in this show, if they actually allowed people to maybe talk to all the other people for 5 minutes and then match based on that, I think it would be a lot better than, I don't know exactly how they did their matching on this. But one work I'm just writing up now, so it's not published yet, but the analyses are in, is that a video setting actually elicits very similar kinds of impressions as we get face-to-face, much more similar than we get in a photograph or a written vignette. And it doesn't even have to be us talking. You would just have to watch me, let's say, be on a date with somebody else, and you would get a very similar kind of impression than if you interacted with me face-to-face. So this, to me, tells me that online dating profiles need to have like a video platform or something, because then you're more like, it's exhausting to go on date after date after date and it just not work out, and expensive too. And so it'd be better if you could kind of get a clear sense of who's compatible before you have to spend money and dress up and go on the date.
Right.
Hopefully that answered your question.
Lucy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Lucy, one thing that I've always found interesting is that I had the privilege of doing summer camps in America, and the one organization that I worked with, they ran weekends away for singles. And it was a very interesting collection of people together. I mean, I won't go into too much detail to describe them, but what I found fascinating is that throughout the weekend, they did provide much alcohol because they were all over the age of 21, and they were using social lubricants, obviously, to get them together. But what did end up happening is that many of the camp counselors went over and above and beyond the call of duty, and they ended up hooking up with many of the participants. And, and as an observer, the one key aspect that they had, which many of the participants did not have, was confidence. They were able to start up a conversation. They were able to create a connection purely because they had a sense of confidence that the participants did not have. So how much do traits like confidence, sense of humor, those sorts of things have in comparison to looks when it comes to attractiveness?
That's a really good question. So great story too. Um, so confidence, I'm actually glad you mentioned that because that is something that does matter a lot in initial impressions. So for example, my advisor, before I started work with him, he did something cool with the speed dating study. So at almost every speed dating event, the woman always sits and it's the men who rotate. I think this just goes back to ancient chivalry or whatever. But um, and what he found is that, and what many researchers find, is that men yes more of their dates than the women. So what he did was he had the women instead rotate, and it erased the sex difference. So the women weren't necessarily more likely than the men to yes their dates, but there wasn't that difference anymore. They were about just as likely to yes their dates as men. And they also asked about confidence. And I believe I'm remembering this correctly that they did find something an interaction with confidence, that the act of having to physically watch and approach somebody makes you more confident, and that is more likely to elicit attraction. So confidence is one of those things that I think it's one of those state level things. Although there are people that vary in confidence, I think it's probably more important for you to pump yourself up and try to make yourself feel confident, because there is some truth to if you start to fake it, you will start to feel it as well. But in terms of sense of humor and things like that, I would say that unless you're hooking up with somebody pretty soon after you meet them, there's so little agreement on who is funny. Intelligence, there's a little bit more, but it just becomes so subjective that I would say, instead of trying to pump up your own qualities, all you need to find is the one, right? So just find that one person who thinks you are really attractive, funny, intelligent. Because even if everyone hates your bad jokes, you really just need that one person who thinks you're really funny.
All right, Tanya.
Thanks, Lucy. I was just wondering if you've also considered, the age difference. So look at couples that are fairly young and, easy peasy to go out, compared to people that are beyond their sell-by date, expired their shell life. So would you find a difference in their behavior or not?
Yes, and actually a lot of developmental researchers do look at age. And for instance, in online dating, older adults tend to be a little less picky and more open, especially one study I'm thinking of looked at interracial dating and found that you'd think that older adults, I guess because, they grew up in a different time, you'd think that they would be less willing to maybe contact people from different backgrounds, but you actually didn't see that. And I think the argument is that, yes, maybe if we asked all the old people, that sounds terrible, older, that you might see a difference. But, the people who are using online dating sites, these are the singles who are actually interested in meeting somebody. So they're in a different mindset than, say, the average person who could or could not be in a relationship. So age does some interesting things. In the study where we're looking at similarity and attractiveness, we did have the dating group and the married group, and actually we didn't see many differences between them in terms of matching on physical attractiveness. So there's only one trait, and we were just examining it with respect to how long you knew somebody before dating. But I think there are ways in which it's very similar, but ways in which it's different. And one complaint I hear from younger people, like using Tinder and things like that, is that they have no idea what the other person wants. Like you said, so sure, okay, maybe, but that uncertainty can enhance attraction. And there's been work showing that uncertainty does enhance attraction, but it can also create a lot of anxiety when we don't know what page we're on with somebody.
Okay, any more questions? I've got one too. All right, just Steve, later.
What happens in the case of planned marriages? I mean, do they actually grow to like each other more along the way? Because they don't have another option. So your option is you marry that person and end of story. Do they then grow attracted to each other?
They do. Actually, there has been work on arranged marriages. And if anything, you actually see in terms of divorce rates and things like that, they actually do better than non-arranged marriages. There are difficulties obviously associated with it, but there is some truth to the saying, well, not the saying, but I guess from a uniqueness perspective, you're either likely to really, really not like somebody or really, really like somebody. But if you're also living within this culture where arranged marriages are more the norm, you're probably also likely to hold schemas and ideologies that will make you better able to cope with those relationships. For example, if in any sort of relationship you perceive a lot of disapproval from your friends and family, it puts a strain both on the relationship and on those friendships. So if you grow up in a culture where arranged marriages are the norm, you are likely to do well. We do see pretty positive outcomes with arranged marriages.
Okay. All right, NASA Jim.
All right, I'd just like to make a proposal that we reach a consensus tonight that we're all 9s.
Oh, definitely. At least to a few people.
All right, I'm going to allow one last question here in the front.
I have a question. When it comes to arranged marriages, you say they grow to like each other more. Is it kind of a Stockholm syndrome?
You know, I'm not sure if they've specifically looked at that. But I mean, humans are really good at what's called cognitive dissonance, which is when we normally shouldn't like something, but we talk ourselves into liking it anyway. For example, if we do a really difficult study and they only pay us, like, let's say $1 versus $10, if you're in the $1 condition, you're going to say that the study was a lot more fun than when you got the $10 because you had to justify the time you wasted at the study. So that's sort of a maudlin way, I guess, of looking at relationships. But I think that one thing that people forget is that above and beyond a partner's individual skills and ideals and standards is that much more that affects later relationship outcomes like divorce and breakups are situational things, how much stress each person is experiencing, things like that. So in arranged marriages, I'm just guessing, and this is just me theorizing, that maybe because there are more guidelines that it makes it sort of easier to follow a set schema. That I could be completely wrong, but that's my guess. And so maybe, yes, in a sense, like you've grown up, no, you have to make this work. And so you make it work. And you tell yourself that you're happy. The nice thing is when we tell ourselves that something is happening, that eventually comes to be true. So people who expect positive things out of the world generally do better, have better outcomes than people who expect bad things to happen to them.
Okay.
So always expect good.
All right, so 2 last quick things. The first thing is just coming back to methodology. Where you had a focal and several targets, I'm going to assume, but I may be wrong, that you did not share the information or the feedback from the targets to the focals, because I'm thinking that could have ruined a few relationships.
Oh, yes, definitely. And actually, there's been a lot of talk of open science, and I'm completely on board with that. But when studying couples or when people are rating each other, we have to be very careful at publishing that data online. Even if we take names away, like when your birth date, let's say, and your partner's birth date. So if this data was all available online, you could go and find like each other's answers.
Okay.
So no, we didn't share that.
Thank goodness for that. Right, and then one last question, and it's just a yes or no question. Have you found the one?
I don't know. What's interesting, actually, I'm doing my dissertation on single people, how single people navigate their romantic lives, because I do feel like there's a bias in the field towards assuming that everybody wants a long-term committed romantic relationship. I often choose long distance relationships, and I think that reflects my need for autonomy. So a traditional living in the same home, same bedroom with the same person might actually not be something that I subscribe to. But I love setting relationships, and my favorite thing to ask people is, how did you first meet? So I think in general, I'm going to continue to look at that, and hopefully I'll have a fun story to tell maybe one day.
All right. We're going to check in with you in a few years from now. All right. Well, Lucy, from all of us here, here from South Africa, thank you very, very much for your time. I think it's been fascinating. You agree?